June 12, 2016, is a date forever etched in the minds of many Americans. That night, a gunman claimed the lives of 49 people and wounded 53 others inside a gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida. It was also the night a 25-year-old former professional cyclist decided to come out to his family and friends, not only to be true to himself, but to give others the strength to do the same.
I knew I couldn't go back.
You just put it out there.
She said you've got less than a year to live.
Just dug even
Luck
deeper.
is the residue of design.
Nobody else was doing it, so why couldn't I?
That was the turning point.
Welcome to the BUCKiT podcast with Phil Keoghan. Every week I talk to mavericks, disruptors, and innovators. People who ditch the excuses, swerve off the predictable road, and epitomize what it means to tick it before you kick it.
We cannot wait for a few folks in a tiny building on the East Coast to tell us how we should love.
27-year-old Kit Karzen learned early how to overcome challenges. At 8 years old, he was diagnosed with ADHD, isolating himself from his friends at school, and then chronic stress disorder in his early 20s, which nearly ended his life. Yet each time Kit was faced with a problem, he would confront it head-on and turn his obstacles into an opportunity to help others who were going through the same experiences he did. This is Kit's story. All right, this is Kit Karzen, Santa Monica, 2018. That's it. When did I meet you? I remember where I met you.
14, 15?
You were 15, PCH,
Yeah.
on a bike ride with your dad.
Sounds about right.
The crazy PCH.
Crazy.
Remember that?
I mean, what responsible father wouldn't take their 15-year-old son out on a bicycle with traffic?
I think you needed it, though, didn't you?
Clearly.
At 15 years old, I think you were needing to be riding. You had a
too much
lot of energy.
Too much.
Do you remember the Energizer Bunny commercials? You know, the battery. Did you?
I think
get
they
those?
based that off of me.
Yeah, I just remember we're just this ball of energy, 15, but just like so much energy.
If we did this interview like 10 years ago, I probably would have asked to do it on top of the table with me just screaming.
Let's go to the Orlando shooting a few years ago and just take me back to that day. And we were starting the story about what happened to you, because that was a pivotal day for you in your life.
Yeah.
Everything sort of took another turn for you that day.
Completely. The following day of the Orlando shooting was Pride in Los Angeles. And at that time, I was working on a photo series, talking to folks about their coming out journey. It was incredibly inspiring, and hearing all these just often like gut-wrenching processes of coming out to friends and family or your church or local network. And so finally, when I had no intention of coming out, but then the Orlando shooting had happened, and I was feeling very at arm's length with the LGBTQ community. And I was surrounded by, that evening, I went out, hit the bars with some friends, and, I ended up going back with a number of people who, when the news started rolling in about what had happened in Florida, I just kind of watched them glaze over at what they were hearing. And they weren't affected in any way. It was just kind of like, all right, that happened. And I felt incredibly angry that they didn't feel like they could be more proactive, or that they just couldn't feel human. I think that they were so, they're prioritizing putting on a show for one another about how cool they are, what they're wearing, or what country they're going to go visit next week. And I was just like, where am I? Like, who am I with? Like, this is completely wrong. Something's not right here. And so I left immediately, and I just couldn't figure out what was my next move. And my dad called me, and I had actually come out to him and my mom a couple months prior. And he said, hey, son, how are you? And I said, Dad, I'm not good. And he said, why don't you come meet me over at Flaming Saddles? Because one of his old friends runs the joint. And so I go and I walk and turn the corner, and there's my father and, cycling kit. And he rode over, and he sees me and just kind of gives me this big fatherly hug. And, my dad, and my dad loves taking selfies. And he goes and he clicks one. And that day I was still processing the trauma of what had happened, to the community, and what was still being processed. And, how is there a pride parade where everybody's like celebrating, and yet there's this deep, deep, devastating loss at the same time. And it was just so contrasty. So finally as a person in their mid-20s does, I went onto social media and just kind of wrote up a little thing and used that photo that my dad had taken of him and I, and decided to come out to the world.
And how did you come into the queer community? When you say you came into the...
So my journey into the queer community, when I was younger, I raced bicycles up until I was...
Well, that's how I know you.
And that's how we know each other. So,
right.
Up until 21...
And let's just set the record here. You weren't just any kind of bike rider. You were a national champion at the age of 16. You had a national jersey. And for people who know cycling, if you ever become a national champion, you get to wear the flag of the country, the bars on your uniform. And that's something that you did as a young cyclist. You were destined to be... you were world class, but you were destined to be a professional cyclist. That was your road. You took all of that energy as a kid that you had with...
That was the trajectory.
That was where you were going. So I just wanted to set that up. That's okay. So sorry, continue.
No, but so when I was racing, I kind of had the blinders on. And I think as most professional athletes are taught, stay in your lane. And so I didn't devote any time other than professional cycling to develop myself and what my personal interests were. And I was, my identity was not based off of, what I actually loved and who I cared about and, what my priorities were. It was, the voices of my sponsors, my teams, my, publicity folks, my team directors, coaches, like that. I was just an extension and microphone of that.
Yeah.
And trying to manage all of those expectations and voices, you kind of drown out all the other things, and for me, that was my sexuality. It wasn't a question.
Were you aware that of your sexuality, or did you literally just shut it out and just not even deal with it?
Shut it out. I had dated women exclusively up until I was 21. And it just kind of felt, it was normal. It was what everyone else was doing. It was the expectation, Did
it ever occur to you that you were attracted to men before that age?
It didn't. For me, I think that, there would be times where I, that's a handsome looking fella or something like that. But aside from that, flash pan moment, it doesn't, I couldn't ever see myself doing anything more than just, looking at that for half a second,
right?
And then
but maybe admiring a good-looking guy like you, like anybody would when you see a good-looking person in general.
Yeah,
right.
It's just handsome, beautiful, gorgeous,
right?
Pretty.
Oh, that's an elegant
whatever.
person.
Yeah, and so that kind of was it. The conversation was done. And so once I retired from cycling at 21, now I had all this time to process.
And you were probably for the first time in your life. Like you said, it was the first time that you got out of the lane and kind of went, hold on a second, I've been going this way, but there was
all this other stuff.
World out there.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to how cycling really did save you, though, because it does sound, when you're talking, it's sort of like, oh, cycling put you down this path and it sort of narrowed your scope of life. But if it wasn't for cycling, in a way, you could have gone off on a completely on the wrong track.
Yeah.
So go back to when you're 13 years old, or even younger, and you were diagnosed with...
So 8 years old, I was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And, you couldn't pay me to sit still for more than 5 minutes at a time. And so I just run around and I disrupt everything. And, I was the pariah in this, the classical education system because, while, my child is there and they're, learning and trying to further their education, you have this, ticking time bomb that's setting off every 15 minutes. Like, I was the definition of a disruption.
Would we also say the definition of out of control?
Completely.
And were you aware of that when you were a kid, that you were...
It was normal.
It just felt normal to you?
Well, to me, it felt like the world was just moving slower than what I could process it as. It's like when you see... the Marvel movies, and you've got
or the Matrix, when everything kind of
of course
you can
where it's just everything just kind of moves slower, and you're
everybody
just
else thinks you're going fast, but you're just
I'm just going my speed, and I'm here and there, and so you kind of you do that enough times, but people obviously clearly didn't mesh with the speed that I was moving at. In 3 years, I was put on, I think, around 5 different medications. And it was anything from patches, like a nicotine patch, to pills and, creams that you'd put on your skin so that it absorbs, stuff that didn't even have names yet. And so I was kind of this guinea pig, but also just trying to figure it out. And
did it work?
No. to be honest, I remember one of the medications that I was put on, the directions of how much I needed to actually be, my dosage was never communicated properly. So instead of taking, a quarter, I was taking a full dosage of this thing. So in 3rd grade, come around, noontime, I was basically narcoleptic, and I just pass out at my desk. And so what was happening was my brain was being so over stimulated from this stimulant that I clocked out and I was done. And so by the time that I was 11, I was talking to my parents. I'm like, God, I can't do this. I'd rather be.
You didn't feel yourself.
Of course not.
And you must have just resented having to take these things because of how it made you feel.
I'm not only am I just the class pariah because no one could get a handle on me, but then now I'm also the kid who's force feeding himself medication in the school's nurse's office, just to even feel even more furthered from normal. And so it was a terrible time. I had no identity, hardly any friends, rocky relationships with those around me. And, my only allies were really just my parents, who didn't know anything other than this is the medication pathway. This is the option.
And the whole idea of having this attention deficit disorder was also, we think it's been around, has been around forever, but it wasn't something that was really talked about. Or that people could properly diagnose or treat.
Yeah. My mom, who eventually went on to be diagnosed with adult ADHD, their treatment as kids was the belt and a ruler. That is how you conform someone
and you never
into
got
this
that.
box. No, never. I was raised in a no-hitting household.
Good.
But, it was the reaction to the diagnosis, I find, is often worse than the diagnosis itself of being told you have ADHD and what ADHD actually is. And so for me, I at 11 years old, I just had to remove myself from that process because I was just lost and not myself, and it was horrible. And so finally I cold turkey just kind of got off it. Against doctor's orders. They're like, this
when you
kid
say you
needs
got
to be...
off it, you just said,
stop.
I'm not... you said, you decided.
Yeah. I was like, Mom, Dad, I can't do this. I'd rather be myself and
crazy
psycho than not knowing who I'm going to be tomorrow.
Okay. And how did they react when you said that?
My mom was my biggest advocate in every school meeting. My dad would go to the, PTA meetings and fight for, me. And it was just having parents like that who are so incredibly supportive, it is such a gift, and I acknowledge it, and I love them for that.
So when you were that young kid,
Yep.
you never felt alone in terms of having their support. You said you struggled with holding friends and having young people around you that you could identify with, but as far as your parents went, you always have felt like they're being there for you.
I mean, yes, you don't feel alone because you have mom and dad, but then at the same time, like at 11 years old, to only have mom and dad, it's kind of like, it sucks. Like you want to go out and play and do stuff and be a kid, right? Not, I can trace the floor of, the doctor's office on a piece of paper from sitting in there for just countless hours of my childhood. You're just there and you're just sitting and listening and being told questions, and it's just like, that was my life. And finally drudging through middle school, and I was a D and F student, C's were A's. Like, yes, he's average, thank God. And then finally at 13, my dad went to the Junior World Cycling Championships at the now StubHub Center in Carson, California. And it was for the Junior World Championships, and he went just to watch. And he used to race when he was a kid, and he completely got inspired. And I think that I get I get affected deeply by big moments, and I actively try and change. And so his was, I'm inspired by this, I'm going to get back into cycling. And so we just started riding recreationally for fun and doing small little criteriums and stuff. And then he thinks to himself, what if I just got my son into this? And we had tried every sport at that point, like rock climbing, every all-American sport, you name all the weird, crazy things I just wasn't into. And he said, I remember, Kit, I don't care if you like it, but you're going to try it. And so we went to the Encino Velodrome bike track, and there I am in a white t-shirt and my mom's spandex.
Oh, that must have been a sight. Your mother's spandex?
Oh, yeah.
Kit, please don't wear that uniform again.
Well...
Okay. Well, you know what? Do whatever you want. You know what? Do whatever you want.
I live my life here.
Is there a photo of that? Because that just
there is literally a photo on my website. There's a photo of
wild.
The first day of me on a rental Fuji bike, white shirt, rental hat, and my mother's spandex. Yeah. So I remember, we go, and it's a free kids clinic that they held on a Thursday night in the summer of 2004. And I remember, going through the clinic, and it went as good as you could possibly think it could. And I just remember getting off, and I looked at my dad and I said, Dad, I think I found my sport. And I was so excited. And I just started riding from there. And
you were just instantly good.
Hooked. Right? I think later talking to my dad, one of his inspirations for putting me on the track was Michael Phelps, swimmer.
Yes.
Maybe you've heard of him.
I've heard of him. I think he won, was it 19 gold medals? Something like that.
It's relevant. And so he also ADHD diagnosed, and his mom went on to talk, about her process of getting her son through, ADHD diagnosis and his activity levels. And she remarked how the swim lanes helped him focus.
Right.
So you have not only, the ability to go as fast and as hard as you want, but there's also some assimilation of consistency.
Well,
and
to me,
order.
it sounds like, because you mentioned it before about staying in your lane, it sounds to me like you've got all this energy.
Yep.
And if you don't put blinders on, if you don't swim down a lane, if you don't go round the track in a lane, then all of that energy can go this way, and it's so scattered, it's wasted. So in a way, you went like this. You went, I can go down that path.
And, cycling, at least on the track, it is lanes. You got the full lane, and you got the blue line, and hold your lane. And so for me, I think that, like, at least in the world that I come from, self-inflicted borders are the best way for me to, proceed forward. If I have someone coming in being like, this is right and this is wrong, well, that's your interpretation of the law. For me, if I can put up, the guardrails for me to continue to push forward, such as, like lanes on a velodrome, then I can see, and it's like, I don't need you to tell me, I can see it for myself. My first national championship was when I was 16 years old.
Which you won.
Which I won.
And you were off the drugs.
I had been off the drugs exclusively since I was 11. For me as a kid, one of my favorite things was, when your brain kind of was going as fast as I did, I was always thinking, my mind was always elsewhere. I could never kind of focus on one thing. And one thing that I always used to drain it out was, stuff like music or just turning it up really loud just to kind of like drown everything out. And so one cool thing about the bike that I loved very early on is wind. When you ride fast, then the wind that goes by your ears, it kind of creates like a sound. So the faster I went, the louder it went. The louder the less I could
really
hear.
Interesting.
And so
analogy.
for me, I was just like, I want to drown out as much as I can here, and that can only be created through going faster.
Yeah, well, speed was something you were good at.
Tried.
So when did you figure, okay, this is the path I'm taking. I'm going to become a professional cyclist. Was that after you won the national championships at 16?
I think that I was more focused at 16 on trying to create some thing of an identity for myself, because now I'm in high school, and
was that easier for you with your friends than middle school?
Yes and no. I mean, here's the thing. You spend the majority of your childhood in such isolation that you'll do almost anything just to be part of anything.
Right.
And so for me to be part of the cycling community was incredible. So now, here I am, racing around the world and traveling and have national championships, but at the same time, I'm also not part of the high school social construct.
Did it take you out of that in a way and make it
very
even
much
more,
so?
It made it more difficult.
It made me, ironically, I fell deeper into a community, but you spend only minutes or drops of time in your week devoted to that community, where you're actually surrounded by people at the races or training sessions. The rest of it, you have to kind of make your way through. For me, the public education system, teachers, tutors, friends.
So where your school friends were spending more time out of school connecting, you were disconnecting and going to the track, so you were living like these two different worlds.
Yeah, and it was challenging.
Yeah.
I talked to friends who I went to high school with that were, part of the popular crowd or, in this world. And I always go to them. I didn't go to prom or grad night, didn't go to a single party my entire high school stint.
Not one party?
Not one. It was
because you weren't invited, or
no, because I was racing, I was training, I was traveling.
You weren't available.
Of course, my senior year alone, I missed 12 weeks. I was gone.
Wow.
And so
did you get through high school? Did you manage to pass?
I graduated with honor roll and
almost
really? Straight A's. It was crazy.
So the C student in middle school who couldn't focus gets into cycling, becomes a national champion, and then graduates high school with honors?
Yeah. Oh, how times have changed. So at 18, my parents and we had a conversation. I'm very lucky to be one of those where my parents said, Kit, we don't care how you learn. We just care that you learn. And so I kind of ran with that. And I was like, all right, I want to go down this professional cycling path and see where this can take me.
Ability.
At
that stage, where were you nationally? Were you still a top?
I was coming off of two back-to-back junior world championship teams. I was in talks for World Cups for the first time. I was traveling around the world. It was I felt like I was part of it. I was in it, and I was too far to come out of it. And so I was just there, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna continue down this path, and in the meantime, I'm gonna continue trying. Provoke some of my other interests. And so at that time, it was also television. And so I was interning at MTV in the spring of 2009. And, I did my best to manage all that and also make money through my sponsors and, work incredibly hard. What I didn't know, foresight was that I was kind of actively suppressing a lot of development in my own personal life, which
by just distracting yourself with being busy.
Yeah,
you're a person who at 20 years old decides that now you want to give back, and that seems like a big turn to take at only 20 years old, considering the life that you'd had at this point, where you hadn't even really worked out who you were, but you were wanting to give back. What was that about? Was that about helping other young kids who also had ADHD? Is that what the...
Yeah, so when I was 20, I started doing some small speaking engagements with, that families were pulling me in because they knew through my parents of my ADHD story. And so they were really excited and inspired the idea of, my kid can do something.
You said way back before that you were like a guinea pig. And so
when I was, force feeding pills in the nurse's office of my, elementary or middle school, they're like, oh my God, my kid could actually do something other than that. And so I remember the story that got me into this, and it was, I was talking to this family, and, the kid kind of, as I was talking, seemed like they were just a little blasé to the words that I was saying, and it was the parents that were normally inspired because the kid doesn't know, they just feel what they feel. And so finally, after I'm talking, I'm like, standing over to the side, and the kid comes up to me and kind of like pulls on my jacket, and I lean down, and they said, I hate this medicine. And I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, I don't feel like myself in the most simple, basic way. And I completely resonated with what he was saying because I felt that before. And so I thought to myself, there has to be, I'm not here to question whether or not the validity of ADHD exists, but I feel like the process in which we diagnose kids, the number one neurological disorder of diagnosis amongst children that can't be tested in blood or brain scans or, anything outside of a couple questions, such as, do you have trouble sitting still for copious amounts of time? Like, that's just, for me, it's crazy to think. And of course, no duh. And so I said, there has to be some innovation around the treatment and, the diagnosis process, because I feel like the treatment is often worse than the ADHD itself. So I thought, well, what worked for me? Riding my bicycle. Well, what if we just connected the two? So I partnered with my old sponsored Specialized Bicycles, which is, the biggest bike brand on the planet. I said, hey, idea. What if we gave bicycles to velodrome youth programs like the one that I went to, gave them bikes, and helped create opportunities and awareness for kids to treat their ADHD diagnosis with alternatives other than just medication. Like crazy. What do you think? And they completely got on board. And so we had this big launch party at Synergy Cyclist.
I was there.
You were there in Santa Monica, and we ended up giving 10 bicycles away to the Encino Velodrome Youth Program that I started at. And the Specialized Foundation now actively implements physical education programs through cycling for kids to treat their depression and ADHD and all sorts of mental health issues. And not to mention, it's fact-based. Like, it is proven that kids who are more active than not active have better ways to treat whatever they are going through inside their noggin.
It does take us back to the fact that you're a different person.
Yeah, so, I was actively traveling and racing around the world, and I felt like cycling is such a difficult sport that unless you are irrationally just in love with it, it's too hard. Your entire life has to be devoted. There's no off button. And so for me, I felt like clearly, cycling was not giving me what I wanted. There were always are and have been and will be people who could pedal their bicycle much faster than I can. Towards the end of my tenure as a cyclist, I kind of felt like I stopped being so results based. It was very process based because there are professionals who go 20 years without getting result. Like, you just have to love cycling at that level, at that pain threshold. It just has to kind of be your life. And I knew that there was going to be a day when cycling would not be fun anymore. It happens to everybody, whether you're 15 or 25 or 40. Someone's always told.
And what age was it for you?
I was 21. It was pretty clear that, I needed something more. And so at 21, I was feeling pretty cross-eyed and burnt out. And I said, I think I need to take a step back. And one of my sponsors, Oakley Sunglasses, said, hey, idea, what if you came to London with us and for 5 weeks and, work at our Oakley safe house where we house our athletes and treat them well and hang out and celebrate and stuff like that. And so for me, it was like, okay, yeah, why not? Who's going to say no to that? So I went, and I think I probably slept all of 10 hours over 5 weeks. And it was just, the craziest, most amazing journey. And
did you lift out of the cycling lane and then just go straight into the marketing lane and just manage to take all of that focus and just go down that
pretty
path?
much? I had probably like a 2-3 month gap.
Yeah.
And I needed to fill my time somehow. So I went to one of my old family friends who managed a couple clubs around Los Angeles. And I said, hey, if you need any work or someone to help, like, I'm here, I'm free, I'm waiting to, go to London. Let me know if you have anything.
Okay.
And so he says, well, I actually have this club on Thursdays. You could come do guest list for that. You're 21, right? Yeah, great. Okay. 21 plus guest list, checking off names, all the VIPs and whatever. And it's a gay club. I was like, oh, all right. And so there I was, thrown into this world of being surrounded by, queer folk and drag queens and, gay celebrities, and just being kind of thrown in the lexicon of that. And I'm there and I'm just like, I'm straight.
Yeah.
I am straight. I'm straight. That's it. End of the conversation.
Is that what you kept telling yourself, or?
I think, no. At that point, I started to figure out, okay, I think that there may be something here. but it was also something like queer culture is incredibly colorful and crazy. It's very similar to, the school recess yard, and it's the Wild West, and it's something that I can't control. So in order for me to control my environment and my surroundings, it's by trying to actively remove myself while also, being involved at arm's length. So in effect, by me telling people that I was straight, I was removing the opportunity to lose control of the situation, because it's like, all right, this conversation ends here, or I have a girlfriend, or whatever excuse I could come up with at the time. So, that's just kind of how it went. And so now I'm like going from blinders, cycling, girlfriends, this environment that I had never even questioned, to surrounded by all these, handsome gentlemen. Like, what am I supposed to do with this?
Was it a slow process? Was it?
It definitely took some time. Like, I was still incredibly closeted. I had a lot of firsts.
Did it scare you? Did it?
I think the thing that scared me the most was so much of who I am was defined by being isolated as a kid and trying to feel like you're a part of something in a community. And I wasn't thinking about the queer community. I was thinking about my past and my cycling community and, my family and friends and the people who I'd spent years trying to cultivate. And I thought, oh my God, like this could jeopardize that.
Do you think that the reason you worked so hard at Oakley and you became this workaholic was after that experience, maybe, if I just work really, really hard and shut all of this out and leave, don't deal with all of that right now, I can just sort of forge down this path. And because that took you to another soul searching place, right? The work, you were almost boasting with your co-workers about the lack of sleep you had and how hard you were working. You're not dealing with also now yourself.
I was suppressing quite a bit of stuff, trying to drown the noise in my head by just working.
Once again, you're like focusing your brain on one thing and shutting out dealing with some demons.
Yeah, big demons.
And then it gets to a breaking point, right? You just keep going and going and going. And sleep deprivation, so focused on work.
What ended up happening was in 2013, I was in a meeting with some coworkers, and the room started to spin, and it was the first time that I ever had a panic attack. And so I'm at work, and so I'm like, I don't feel right, so I'm going and I leave the building and I'm just doing laps, trying to walk it off. And my brain just was turning off, and I couldn't create, order in my head, and couldn't complete sentences, and the room was shifting around, and it was horrible, and this lasted for days. And so
Couldn't sleep because of it?
couldn't sleep. I'd wake up. I was suffering from panic attacks, mid REM cycle. Like, it was horrible. And so I remember just waking up one day and, thinking that it was all over, and then it happened again. And so I was like, all right, I think this is it. So I got out my front door and I started walking towards oncoming traffic. And I said, all right, this is...
What, you were going to just take your life?
That was it, yeah. I couldn't control, I couldn't figure out how to turn it off. This
Jeez.
Crazy feeling. And so I said, well, there's one way to turn it off. So as I'm walking towards oncoming traffic, I get a phone call from my mother, of all people. And I'm like,
the timing of the call.
Oh my God. My mom,
What did she say?
she was just checking in, normal.
Oh,
And,
is everything okay?
Yeah, how
are
son,
you?
What's up?
Sounds like you're near a road.
So the moment I hear her voice, I sober up. I start to, the world
That's what
is...
mums are for.
Yeah, they're really just like...
Yeah.
And I went into therapy, and he says, Kit, tell me about your lifestyle now. And I said, are you stressed out? And I'm incredibly, I'm working 20-hour days, and I'm doing all this stuff, and Oakley, and left cycling, and I'm kind of just putting all my cards on the table for this one thing. And he says, you are at war, and you haven't completed basic training. And I was like, what? And he says, within a 3-month period, you did the whole, you moved out, you got a car in a new city, away from your friends, have a salary, more money than you know what to do with, at a big honking company with, no past credentials aside from your bicycle. You've got a lot.
Suppressing your sexuality.
Suppressing sexuality, which wasn't even a conversation at that point, which I'm sure also helped trigger it. But he's like, you've got so much going on that most people, moving away is like going to college, which I didn't do. And that is its own thing. Getting your first car when you're 16.
Rite of passages.
There are all sorts of kind of delayed and tiered rite of passages that I think that most people go through, so it's more digestible. I did it all at once. Not to mention I was going through a severe identity crisis and, actively trying to work out who Kit Karzen was. And so he said, you need to balance out your life. Start riding your bicycle. I was like, what? Why? What's the point of that? And he says, just because you don't feel like it has meaning doesn't mean that it doesn't actively help your body. Your brain needs time to adjust and rest. And resting, although physically it may be difficult and tiresome, and you don't have aspirational goals of going to the Olympics, it actually helps your brain function and, rid some of those demons that you're feeling. So I was like, okay, doctor, great. So, following week, I get on my bicycle, and my brain just started to slowly, it took...
The magic pill.
It took a year and a half to get back to feeling 100% normal, and quite a bit of therapy. But, I started to feel like myself again.
So did you just back out of all of that hard work, or something happened at Oakley, right? I mean, all of a sudden...
Oakley was on the verge of laying, at the time, half of the company, including my whole division. So I thought to myself, wow, this is how Kismet, is perfect. My last day was November 2nd, 2015, and I spent that morning packing my desk and then taking my severance over to Sammy's Camera on Fairfax in Los Angeles and buying a bunch of used photo gear. And in my mind, I thought to myself, I can actively learn the production storytelling process, because it, lights and crew and cameras and stuff, and taking a singular photo in my mind felt much easier to comprehend something I could do myself while I tried to learn this process on the side of TV. So I'm, taking photos, and then my first job in television was January 2016, working on MasterChef.
What I love about what you've done is I think you've come to realize, hey, you know what? Kit Karzen is actually a pretty normal human being, but that you have something to share. And this is why I love what you're doing with these letters that you're writing to your 12-year-old self.
I started writing letters to myself, to try and talk about the people, places, events that made an impact on my queer journey for the better. And
so the goal, Kit, is that you want other 12-year-olds to read it, or is it anybody maybe who they could even be your age? It's just to what? It's just to
it's almost just like a guide to try and understand the types of people who you should involve and surround yourself with in order to create a balanced and healthy coming out process as best that you can. A lot of this, the stories that I tell are about, Ingenue, who is the first drag queen that I ever met and learned and befriended. I'd never met a drag queen before, and it kind of just says, all right, you need to put yourself out there with all the different types, and colors of,
what it means
of the LGBTQ rainbow, right, and not just isolate yourself in, whatever letter you identify with.
I wanted to read this part of the letter that you wrote to yourself about what's going to happen with your dad, right? And you said, and I think that one of the biggest fears you'll have about coming out is you're going to be afraid of losing your proud father. So this is you talking to your 12-year-old self.
Correct.
And the fear that this dad who loves you and who's so proud of you, particularly as you become national champion at 16, but you're saying this, and how did that finish? You said you carried on talking about what was going to happen.
I think a lot of times in that story is very similar to what a lot of the fears that I felt about my sponsors and friends and family, and a lot of it kind of boiled down to, people love you. It shouldn't matter based on who you love or what you are and what you do. They are there for you. And I think that I was so, towards the end of me before I came out, was worried about jeopardizing those relationships with my friends and family, and relationships that I worked so hard to create over time that it really doesn't matter.
You were worried all of that was just going to strip away, and so you're saying to your 12-year-old self, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
People will love you for who you are. Yeah. Don't worry about that part of it.
I'm one of the lucky ones who thankfully has not had a moment of anyone in the world that I've created for myself that ended up saying, I don't accept this.
I like the old Kit Karzen, but I don't like the new one.
Haven't had that yet.
You haven't had that. No. But there are others who have.
Of course.
Yeah.
That happens
every day.
Every too often. Yeah. And so, the reason why I decided to choose my 12-year-old self is it was before I started cycling. That's kind of when I was bottomed out.
Right.
I was off medication. I was DNF student. I was not riding my bicycle. And so that was kind of before I see cycling as my next progression into, a better life for myself. But I wanted to kind of catch that prior.
Kit, there are 12-year-olds out there now who don't believe, you didn't know how your parents were going to react, but there are 12-year-olds out there now who might be pretty certain that their parents are not going to react the way that your parents did.
Yeah.
What do you say to that 12-year-old?
My only piece of advice is the community, regardless of what your family or close friends' reactions are to you and who you truly are, and their reaction, the community will continue to live on. And so it is within our inherent responsibility as a minority group to continue to take care of one another. And so as painful as it may be through that exercise of coming out and say if your family is not accepting, I can't be the one to say that, it should be right and they're wrong and how dare they, because that is not my world. But what I can say is the only thing that you can control in this situation is you.
what you're saying is take solace in the idea that there are people who will open up their arms and embrace you and be there for you.
I wouldn't. Yes and no. I don't want to try and echo the same, all the things that are put on those YouTube videos of, it gets better, because for a lot of people it doesn't. And I'd be wrong if I said that it always does. But what I can say is the pain that you feel, it doesn't last forever. Mm-hmm. And do your best, your very, very best, to not try and put that onto someone else. It is the worst, misery loves company. And the worst thing that we can do as a community is to take that negativity and the pain that is inflicted based on people and their small minds and try and create more self-harm on the community itself for making you feel the way that you feel, for trying to tear down the people who had maybe an easier coming out process than you. That in and of itself will create an environment that is more worse off for the people who have yet to come out as well. We have to, as a minority group, take care of one another. It is within our inherent responsibility, because if we can't take care of one another and love one another, how are we supposed to expect anyone else to feel the same? Taking so much care into the perception of others is something that I actively try and work on. We as a people, until that day comes where everyone is truly equal, we cannot wait for a few folks in a tiny building on the East Coast to tell us how we should love and love one another. It's our job to create and provoke that environment for one another, outside of that. I can't unchange who I am, and I wouldn't dare. But, if for any parent, say who reads these letters and stuff, I hope that it drives forward a little bit more empathy.
Well said. I love this quote. You say, in these turbulent times where everything seems broken, you identified 3 types of people: those who make things happen, those who watch things happen, and those who ask what happened.
You can really just choose. That's one of the few choices you have in this world, is your level of participation. I can be a bigot, and I can be racist, and I can be misogynistic, and I can be transphobic, and it's just not right. You're better than that. We all are, and it just takes a little courage and, swallowing some pride to understand that, there's actually people who are not like you that also live here, that also don't look like you, that also don't love the same way that you do, that also don't feel the same way that you do. That's what's so magical and special about this country, and what's so magical and special about, this community, is you get to explore and see and experience and feel these different levels of consciousness. And I plead for people to continue to explore that in whatever way they feel most comfortable.
Do you think the world would be a better place when you're 50?
I don't know, but I can tell you that I will do everything within my power to try and do that.
Yeah.
I stopped trying a long time ago to control everyone else, because you can't. It's impossible. But I can control my actions, and I can control the way that I interact with people in and out of the LGBT community. One of my favorite Teddy Roosevelt quotes is, "Do what you can with what you have where you are." And
that's a good one.
Waking up every single day trying to change the world, that's impossible, and you'll never feel happy. But if you try and just take micro bites and do everything bit by bit, just keep tacking
one pedal stroke at a time.
Yeah, one pedal stroke. Push the pedals faster, get a bigger gear. Just keep doing that over and over and over again. Yeah, that's all you can do.
So, Kit, I was just going to end with a couple questions. If you were to take a long road trip and you could take anybody from any period in time in the car with you, 3 companions?
3 companions?
Yeah.
I'd take my mom when she was in her 20s.
Okay.
because
Nobody has ever changed the age of the person, by the way, but that's cool.
I feel like a lot.
20-year-old mom. Okay.
My mom, she's lived so many different lives, and so many of the most wild, fun stories are of her when she was younger, and she was a wild child just like me, and I'd love to experience that with her.
Okay, so 20-year-old mom.
20-year-old mom. Harvey Milk, Martin Luther King.
That's a interesting carve. You think your mother would behave herself?
Hell no. I think
she might be a little disruptive.
Yeah, we are the Karzens. Disruptive is what we do.
Your last day on Earth, Kit, what would you do with that?
I'd probably do exactly what I'm doing now. I've worked incredibly hard to try and create a life for myself where it feeds itself and it is fun, and I don't have to question the validity of it. And so now I'm doing it. I wake up and I get to take pictures and make TV shows and be around amazing people. Like, what? I wouldn't train this life for anything. So why change it on my last day?
Well, I think you're going to make the world a better place. You already have, and I'm kind of keen to see what you're going to do.
Likewise.
I'm in the next 25 years or so.
Thank you.
Thanks for talking to me.
Great to be here. Of course.
You can watch this podcast online at philkeoghan.com. And let me know what's on your bucket list. You never know. You might be my next guest. Don't forget, tick it before you kick it.